My oldest son was arrested at school for a fist fight. To that point, he had never been in trouble before, like ever. Not at home, not at school, community, just like really solid kid. And when we finally had his hearing, totally blindsided with him being placed over a fight.
Camilla Davis Spears works 62 hours a week on the overnight shift as a security officer.
I'm like literally flabbergasted that I'm being taken to court for child support from my son.
What Camilla is talking about is the
problematic,
damaging,
flawed revenue source,
double tax, broken system
of juvenile fees and fines. But what is a fine?
A fine is something that is part of a penalty that's imposed on someone for violating a law. Municipal ordinance, state law, misdemeanor, felony infraction.
And what is a fee?
When someone gets into trouble, they get arrested, they go in front of a court or a judge, they not only face consequences from the justice system, they also have to pay a lot of money to the courts.
And it wasn't court, it was like you said, it was a room of cubicles, and you just met with that man. And he asked me for, my current pay stubs and tax return, and he's clicking and tapping and sending emails for about 10 minutes. And he's like, oh, well, you only owe $12,000.
That's right. In many cases, parents may even have to pay for their children to stay in detention. They may also need to
pay to apply to have a public defender,
investigations,
an electronic monitor,
probation,
drug tests. The range is limitless.
There's this belief that all young people in the justice system are hardcore criminals. This is a myth.
The largest percentage of young people who are in that system are there for minor stuff, violating their probation, missing a court date, things that are very low level.
Another mistaken belief is that young people of color commit more crimes than young white kids.
Researchers have found that adolescents are just as likely to commit crime if they're white, black, brown, or indigenous.
But because of heightened policing in their communities, young people of color are far more likely to end up in the juvenile justice system.
And being a single mom, it was extremely hard. Juan was 15 years old at that time.
Yulisa Soto had just gotten a job working at McDonald's for $19,000 a year.
And I was waiting for him in the car. But then my son never came out from the store. And then a couple police officers, they said that he stole a toothpaste. And I said, okay, we have the money here. Can we pay you for the toothpaste? They were like, no, he needs to learn his lesson. And when we appear in court, I did not understand what was my son pleading guilty to. I was not provided with a translator. We just say yes. And then some penalty fees came along, around $8,000. So imagine, go back to making $19,000 a year, and then taking $8,000 from that.
Fines and fees really have a very racist history. It really starts from the time of slavery.
After the Civil War ended, many states passed laws against newly freed African Americans, known as the Black Codes.
They criminalized pretty normal behaviors, unemployment or not having a permanent residence. They had to pay very high fines for not complying. When people couldn't pay off their fines, they were forced back into labor, into a system that mimicked slavery.
A lot of us love to move past and act like slavery ever ended, but I am a slave. I don't have the rights that you have as a human being. I do not. I am the property of the state. I have a number associated along with my name that is like a barcode.
So, how did the modern-day juvenile justice system evolve into what we see now?
Starting in the 90s, there was a professor at Princeton who put forward this theory that he came up with, he just made it up, that there was going to be a wave of what he called super predators. And he described that as black and brown youth and indigenous youth would come in larger and larger cohorts and wreak havoc on all of society.
A super predator is a young juvenile criminal who is so impulsive, so remorseless, that he can kill, rape, maim without giving it a second thought.
He was so persuasive with his prediction that he caused the whole field of juvenile justice to shift from what had previously been an orientation on rehabilitation to a model of being punitive, locking up young people for very long periods of time and trying them in the adult court system as opposed to the juvenile court system.
But the super predator theory was baseless and eventually disproven. John DiIulio admitted it himself in 2001.
The predictions were off by a factor of 4. It had doubled and it was supposed to double again, and instead it was halved, right? And so that's about as far off as one could possibly get.
In the light of Michael Brown's death, the Department of Justice found that the citizens of Ferguson were being charged really high fees and fines. When they couldn't pay those fines, they were getting caught up in the justice system.
So in the United States, the largest economy in the world, the only way that we can finance the city of Ferguson is to collect $100 here, $200 there from a bunch of black people. This is all crazy town absurdity.
In 2015, advocates began studying fees and fines in the juvenile justice system.
At that time, what we found was that in almost every single state, courts could charge young people and their families as they're going through the juvenile justice system.
As a youth, it's really hard to get a job. You'll have to get working papers from the schools, and not a lot of schools do working papers. If you're subject to fines and fees and you don't pay those back, then they're going to put a warrant out for your arrest.
1 month I would decide to pay the penalty fees, and then the other month I will decide to pay rent. So I was always late on rent. We ended up paying those $8,000, but we did get evicted.
This is not about accountability. This is about raising revenue for local governments because wealthy people do not want to pay their fair share of taxes.
If fees and fines are so pervasive, why haven't we heard about this before? One of the many reasons young people and their families impacted by the juvenile justice system avoid speaking out is due to a very real fear of retaliation.
Many young people are still in some way under the control of the juvenile justice system. So that control causes young people to be fearful that speaking out about these practices could result in further harm.
To speak out against fees and fines threatens the entire judicial system as it stands. This means that sometimes, yes, a probation officer will write a young person up for something that they ordinarily would have let slide, as a way of getting back at them for speaking their truth.
That fear is real and it's legitimate because it is a punitive system that does retaliate. There's no question about that.
How is this even legal?
So it's not legal, but just because it's not legal doesn't mean it doesn't happen all the time.
We ended up with separation of family because my daughter decided to go back to Mexico with a father that she barely knew and leave Juan and me here paying the system.
The cost of collecting fines is often greater than the fine itself, but the impact on families could be their entire financial stability.
Once that warrant gets put out for your arrest, they're gonna lock you up no matter what age you are. If you do time, that affects your record. And with a record, it's extremely hard to get a job. You can only work certain jobs, fast food, warehouse work. Those jobs do not pay, not even the cost of living. So being a youth with fines and fees is gonna mess you up big time.
There's a question of equal justice and there's a question of fairness when we're talking about funding our system off the backs of people who can't afford it.
Many people believe that parents should be responsible for their children's fees and fines.
These are taxpayers, and they are essentially paying a double tax because they are already paying taxes that fund these facilities. We all are.
So, what's the solution?
The Debt-Free Justice campaign came together when 3 partner organizations were doing similar work in various states, and it made sense to come together and create a national campaign.
One of our goals with the Debt-Free Justice campaign is to ensure that resources that people need in order to pass laws in their state are readily available to them.
So families like Ulysses don't have to suffer the same fate.
Here you have a family who become homeless and didn't have even food on the table. I had 2 jobs just to pay the bills. I would work 4 in the morning till 11 p.m. Never saw my kids. Our family was falling apart.
At Debt-Free Justice, our mission is to abolish all juvenile fees and fines in all 50 states because
This is going to have a minimal impact on the budget, positive impacts on public safety, better for kids and families, and that it's the right thing to do.